Starting Tuesday, more than 17,000 US and Philippines troops will be holding the largest ever joint military exercises between their countries.
The Chinese Coast Guard sailing as close as 1 nautical mile to the Philippine vessel.
This video released by the Philippine Coast Guard shows their Chinese counterparts blasting a water cannon at a Philippine supply boat.
The complicated history of China and the Philippines is one of the few stories in the turbulent field of international relations that has managed to fascinate people all around the globe. After being politically and economically tied for a long time, their union seemed to be indestructible. The once solid link, however, began to fray as more time passed, and China gradually lost its hold over the Philippines as a result. How did this seismic change come about, which has both diplomats and academics scratching their heads? Join us as we dig into the gripping tale of how China's hold on the Philippines eroded, studying the crucial events, political movements, and underlying causes that laid the scene for this gap. Since the beginning of modern international politics, lesser governments have been forced to contend with the daunting obstacle of managing the competition between large powers. The geopolitical competition between the United States and China is the driving force behind the need for nations to strike a balance between the many conflicting national interests they have. Both the internal and external circumstances in people's lives determine which side they lean towards. The Philippines, which has an interest in preserving both its increasing economic links with neighboring China and its security alliance with the United States, which has been in place for the better part of a century. After his victory in 2016, former President Rodrigo Duterte put a larger focus on the economy, dramatically shifting the Philippines' relationship towards China and away from the United States. Duterte sought Chinese investment in his pet project, the Build infrastructure program, in exchange for China's moderation of its aggressive behavior in the West Philippine Sea, particularly the capture of islands and outcroppings claimed by the Philippines. However, China did not abide by the demand. By the time Duterte's presidency ended in June of last year, China had delivered less than 5% of the $24 billion it had intended to invest in the Philippines and its provocations in the West Philippine Sea, which is part of the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, continued unabatedly. Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who succeeded Duterte as president, has so far adopted a more cautious and strategic approach because of his profound anxiety about the territorial disputes in the South China Sea that have been stoked by Chinese claims. Marcos has made the decision to renew and strengthen his country's collaboration with the United States. To this end, the Philippines has decided to provide the United States with access to 9 different military bases, an increase of 4 from the previous number. There are many of these outposts located in or near hotly disputed waters in the South China Sea. The United States military routinely rotates personnel at the designated bases. The U.S. and the Philippines have agreed to start doing coordinated patrols in the South China Sea. Before the president took office, these patrols have been put on hold for 6 years. The Philippines and Japan have just signed an agreement to further develop their defense ties, joining the United States in this endeavor. The Japanese military would have greater access to Philippine territory for training and logistical needs under the provisions of the agreement. The Philippines is also striving to deepen its marine partnership with the UK. On February 7, the two countries held their first maritime talks. In the South China Sea, the Philippine and Australian ministers of defense came to an agreement 2 weeks later to formalize their strategic defense commitment. After their initial meeting, the two government representatives came to this understanding. As a result, the Philippines are quickly establishing themselves as a pivotal center of military cooperation among the democracies of Southeast Asia. This bestows significant strategic advantages onto the United States, for which China has only itself to blame. Not only have China's attempts to coerce its neighbors into submitting to its demands and preferences been unsuccessful, but they have also contributed to the formation of a loose anti-China alliance throughout the Indo-Pacific region. Coast Guard conflict. The Philippine Coast Guard has started using the truth as a weapon against China's aggression in the South China Sea. The Philippines is applying diplomatic and popular pressure on China by utilizing video and eyewitness testimonies to expose China's harassment of its personnel and civilian population. This makes it more difficult for Beijing to maintain its claims of peaceful conduct in the South China Sea. The Philippines is using lawfare to weaken China's credibility before the world by stressing the illegality of China's conduct alongside the facts. The Philippines went to deal with many of China's provocations in silence when Rodrigo Duterte was in office, often waiting weeks or months before publicly acknowledging their occurrence. the Philippines has made more of an effort to bring attention to China's aggressive moves since the election of President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. this spring, who has shown less willingness to accommodate China. The Philippines has filed 461 diplomatic protests against China since 2016 over China's aggression in what the Philippines terms the West Philippine Sea, the portion of the South China Sea that falls in the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. As of the end of February, 77 of those protests had been made under the administration of Bongbong Marcos Jr. Under Duterte's administration, the Philippines would sometimes sit on information for weeks or longer before publicizing China's transgressions. Now, the Philippine Coast Guard is more likely to spotlight the truth in real time, and diplomats are more likely to act accordingly. The Philippine Coast Guard has stepped up patrols in the West Philippine Sea and made an attempt to expose and monitor China's conduct in the area since Marcos took office. The Philippine Coast Guard Commodore, J. Terriella, has said that I'd like to emphasize that the best way to address Chinese gray zone activities in the West Philippine Sea is to expose it specifically. This refers to China's practice of employing research and fishing vessels that appear to be civilian but are actually part of the country's marine militia in order to carry out military tasks. For him, the tactic allows like-minded states to express condemnation and reproach, which puts Beijing in the spotlight, he added. According to one author, Chinese actions in the shadows are now checked, which also force them to come out in the open or to publicly lie. Western journalists have been brought aboard Coast Guard vessels to experience Chinese aggression firsthand. The situation has most definitely been like this in South Korea. China implemented severe economic restrictions on the nation in 2016 after it reached an agreement with the United States to host a THAAD missile defense system in response to a growing number of threats emerging from North Korea. After it, there was a significant shift in public sentiment in South Korea against China. On a scale from 1 most negative to 100 most positive, the current level of sentiment towards China and South Korea is 26.4, which is 2 points less favorable than the level of sentiment towards North Korea. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, like Marcos before him, has worked to improve ties with the United States. Part of the motivation for this is to appease the general public. Tense relations with Japan are another area he hopes to improve. His announcement of a plan to compensate Koreans who were forced into work by the Japanese colonial government during World War II is a step in the right path. A similar shift of China's foreign policy was prompted by China's strong sanctions against Australia, which were implemented in 2020 as retaliation for the Australian government's request for an independent investigation into the beginnings of the COVID-19 incident and enhanced security cooperation, often known as AUKUS, was established between Australia, the United States of America, and the United Kingdom in September 2021. In addition, the United States, Japan, India, and Australia have been working towards enhancing the quadrilateral security dialogue. All of these measures have the intention of improving safety, but they also each come with some degree of danger. Henry Kissinger, a former Secretary of State for the United States, wrote the book Diplomacy in 1995. In it, he contended that the combination of truculence and indecisiveness shown by the leaders of Imperial Germany was what hurled their country first into isolation and then into war. His point of view is that the leaders of the world were swayed by the emotions of the moment and hampered by an extraordinary lack of sensitivity to foreign psyches, which contributed to the outbreak of World War I. There is a possibility that the same dynamic is at play now. To prevent the gloomy events of the 20th century from repeating themselves in the 21st century, reasonable judgment will be required on all sides. Democracies all throughout the Indo-Pacific region have a responsibility to ensure that their answers do not further exacerbate the existing level of tension, and China has a responsibility to acknowledge the concern that it has caused with its aggressive behavior. If it doesn't happen, it might easily sleepwalk into a disaster. That's all for today. Thanks for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Additionally, if you're new to this channel, I strongly encourage you to subscribe and click the like button. You can also keep up with all of my most recent videos. See you in the next one.